Hey everybody, Beth Wheatrikowski, Michael Saunderson Company. I hope you're doing well. Want to talk to you a little bit about title. We've been talking about homestead. Homestead has a lot to do with title, and there are some strange title instances that you need to know about. So sometimes there are people on title who aren't living in the property, right? So we're talking about things where someone passes away. We're talking about a divorce situation. We're talking about sometimes an older person or a younger person will have a relative on title, hi Fred, who, for security purposes, should anything happen to them, maybe it's part of their trust, maybe it's, hi Michael, maybe it's security or the person's unwell, things like that. So how does this work? So when you're talking about a deceased person being on title, oftentimes this is a spouse, and when a spouse dies, hi Steve, part of the process of what one does for the estate, hey, is not necessarily to remove that person from title. Many times, hi Dan, say hi to Michelle, many times when I'm working with someone who has a deceased spouse, the other person is still on title. So what do? You still sell the property, but before you go to closing, you should, as soon as you can, get that closing agent the materials for that person. In other words, you need to have a death certificate and possibly some Social Security information. If they're still on your mortgage, you're going to have to make sure that you start that process early to remove that person from mortgage, or show your lender or whomever holds the loan at that time that that person is no longer with us. Sometimes the lending process takes longer than the title process when we do death certificates. So it is always best, hi Tito, always best that when you're selling your property, when I look at your tax rolls, hi Carl, I'll see that there's another person on there, and then we'll start that process just to make sure that when we get to closing, we're not holding up your closing because we haven't taken care of this. Now let's talk about divorce. Sometimes what happens is when two people get divorced, both persons will still remain on title. We're talking about lots and lots of situations. Hey Rich, sometimes the person who's no longer living on the property is perhaps paying the mortgage, and of course they want an interest in the property, naturally so. Sometimes what it is part of the divorce agreement is that someone is going to remain on the property, and when the property sells, eventually if the property sells, both persons want equity, and it's easier to do it at sale than at the divorce proceedings. Sometimes there's multiple properties, and what will happen is the spouses will then be on the multiple properties if they decide to do that. And all this gets hashed out in your divorce. Here's how this turns out. If you have, you want a present? Hey Richard. Sometimes what happens is that you need to make sure that in a divorce situation, or if you are divorced, that both parties are on board in order to do this, that both parties understand the sale price, both parties are comfortable with what the net is going to be and all of that. Because even though your spouse has been out of the house for 10 years, maybe the mortgage is in your name, but if they're still on title, you legally can't sell that property without them. Hey Angela. So when you're in a situation like that, oh, thank you. When you're in a situation like that, we'll need to do some digging, and we'll need to do a little bit of footwork ahead of time to make sure that the ex-spouse is okay with the proceedings and comfortable with this, and of course in the loop. There's all kinds of things that get mixed up and all sorts of things like that in a divorce situation, but typically that's the situation. Hey Norris. Now, oftentimes when you're talking about older persons and sometimes single persons, you may have an older person like your mom or your dad who want to put a child on title just in case something happens. Or you'll have a single person who maybe puts their sibling or their parent on title, again for the same sort of protections. Even though that person is only on title and only on title just so that the person who actually owns the house has the mortgage, pays the bills and everything, has some sort of protection, like maybe with probate or whatnot, you still have to get that other person's signature on all the closing docs in order to sell the property. Hi Norris. Sometimes what we see happen is you may be on the title of your mom's house. You may even have power of attorney. This is something else. If you have power of attorney, of your parent's property, you only have the right to sell that house as long as that parent is still alive. Power of attorney ends upon that person's death, and then you go into probate. So these are just some of the goofy situations when you have multiple persons on property that you may encounter. The best thing to do is, when we talk, the first thing I do is I pull all the tax records, and if we do have multiple persons on property, we're going to dive into who those persons are if they aren't living in the property, and what we need to do to make sure that we can still close on it. So a lot of complicated stuff. If you have any questions on who's on title, who's allowed to be on title, how to get somebody off title, oh, thank you, you're welcome, Michael, then shoot me a message in the comments or a DM. I'm happy to answer them. If I don't know the answer, of course, I will refer you to my favorite attorney, and they can answer the questions for you. If you have any questions about real estate in general, throw it in the comments or put it in the DM, and I'm happy to answer them. I hope everybody's having a great holiday. The rain finally broke and it's beautiful here, and enjoy yourself. Talk to you soon. Bye now.